Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are breaking down one of the absolutely most hilarious, just downright chaotic collisions in all of gaming history. We're looking at the exact moment where the classic centuries-old strategy of traditional chess violently crashes into pure first-person shooter madness. This is the game known simply as FPS Chess. And as you'll see from a legendary match between YouTubers SSundee and Craner, it completely redefines what it actually means to take your opponent's piece. So get ready, because Grandmaster tactics, yeah, they have absolutely no place here.
You know, to really appreciate the sheer absurdity of this game, you just gotta look at the contrast. On the one hand, we have the quiet, intellectual reputation of traditional chess, right? It's a game of strict logic, intense patience, and profound silence. On the other hand, we have FPS chess. And what replaces that silence? Well, the roar of flamethrowers, sheer blind panic, frantic running, and players occasionally getting run over by a literal train that just happens to be crossing the map. When you give these little carved wooden pieces heavy artillery, the highbrow intellectualism basically vanishes in an instant.
Honestly, nothing sets the stage for the comedic tone of this gameplay quite like this quote from Craner right as the match kicks off. "I don't know how to play chess. No idea whatsoever." It just immediately establishes that traditional board game knowledge is completely 100% absent from this showdown. But hey, the beauty of FPS chess is that you actually might not need to know the difference between a queen's gambit and a total blunder, just as long as your aim is steady. Okay, let's dive into this. How does this absolute madness actually work? Well, at a basic level, the board looks like standard chess, but when you move your piece to capture an opponent's square, the piece doesn't just quietly leave the board. Instead, both pieces get teleported into a frantic one-on-one FPS deathmatch arena. Whoever wins that gunfight survives, and the loser's piece dies. And what makes this incredibly tense is that your health actually carries over. So if your screen is cracking and you take heavy damage in one fight, you bring that low health right into the next one, unless you somehow manage to heal. Now you might be thinking, are they just running around with standard pistols? Definitely not. Here's where we get into the specific arsenal the players are using in this match, a loadout they call the Ignition Set. This completely flips the game on its head, giving every single chess piece totally unique and highly destructive abilities. It literally turns a medieval battlefield into a hyper-modern war zone. I mean, just look at these ridiculous loadouts for the major pieces. The queen, she gets a jetpack and a flamethrower. The rook is armed with a slingshot sniper and a railgun. The bishop is packing a bazooka rocket launcher. You aren't calculating diagonal vectors here, you are straight up calculating blast radiuses and sniper sightlines. Let's break these down, starting with the most powerful piece on the board. We all know the queen is an absolute nightmare in traditional chess, right? But here, she terrorizes the board by literally taking to the skies. She flies around the arena using a jetpack and just burns opponents alive with a close-range flamethrower. It's an incredibly intimidating unit that causes immediate panic the second she lifts off. Then there's the rook. And man, this thing operates as a completely broken, overpowered sniper unit. It's armed with a charging slingshot sniper and a high-damage railgun. If the player has good aim, the rook can easily pick off enemies from all the way across the arena. During the match, we actually see players landing 4 or 5 consecutive, devastating headshots with this piece, making the rook an absolute nightmare if you get caught out in the open. And then you have the bishop. This piece brings a totally different flavor of chaos. It's this floating unit that dominates by dealing massive splash damage using a rocket launcher, or as the players jokingly call it, the bazooka. The sheer chaotic nature of the bishop forces players to desperately run and build cover, just trying to escape floating rocket barrages that turn the whole arena into a heavily cratered mess. But, well, not every piece is a majestic instrument of destruction. Take the knight, the horse. The knight is meant to be this incredibly agile, fast-moving target. Yet, despite that agility, we see a hilarious irony. In the heat of battle, players using the knight's rapid movement often find themselves completely losing control. In one particularly amazing moment, instead of dodging a sniper shot, the player manages to run their ultra-fast horse directly into a literal moving train that circles the map. Instant death. No way around it. Because the weapons are so intense, players quickly abandon whatever test tactics they started out with for just frantic FPS survival maneuvers. The gameplay totally devolves into constant dodging and running. Players are just smashing their V or F keys to drop giant smoke pillars to block line of sight. They scramble to use their rebirthing ability, desperately trying to heal the visual cracks on their screen that mean they're about to die. We even see them frantically building Fortnite-style walls just to survive a rocket barrage.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because all of this frantic survival points to the broader theme of the match, the total collapse of traditional strategy. As the game progresses, it becomes overwhelmingly clear that actual, centuries-old chess mechanics are completely useless in this environment. No amount of careful planning is going to save you if you can't hit your shots.
Actually, we see this hilarious, totally deadpan attempt from one of the players to engage in real chess. They proudly declare, "I gotta set up my castle with my king. Look at all this chess I'm playing right now." They're orchestrating this classic defensive maneuver, pushing pieces into the corner to build a fortress, acting like an absolute strategic mastermind. But it's completely meaningless. If there's one core takeaway from this entire explainer, it's this epiphany from SSundee mid-match. He says, "Does it even matter if you know how to play chess? 'Cause it's all about shooting anyway, bro." He hit the nail right on the head. Any illusion of Grandmaster strategy just entirely collapses the exact moment you introduce rocket launchers and sniper rifles to the board. Which brings us to the climax of the game. After all the queens, rooks, and bishops have pretty much blasted each other to pieces, we are left with a final showdown. And it is a battle between the absolute strongest, most intimidating piece on the board and the absolute weakest. Let's look at the king for a second. Unlike traditional chess where the king is super fragile and needs constant protection, the FPS chess king is a terrifying, high-health melee brawler. When you engage the king, he activates this intimidating mechanic that traps you inside a massive, inescapable shield radius. You are forced into a point-blank brawl with an absolute juggernaut who simply refuses to go down. So the final stand plays out exactly like this. The king attempts to trap his opponent, but he gets blinded by massive smoke pillars being deployed everywhere. He's trapped inside these giant smoke bombs, swinging wildly in point-blank chaotic melee attempts. But what is he trying to run down? Not a queen, not a rook. He is trying to run down a humble, basic pawn. And shockingly, that pawn is unleashing unyielding, rapid firepower right back at him. Which leads to the ultimate humiliation of the match. SSundee just taunts his opponent, asking, "If you die to a pawn, how bad are you going to feel really?" And against all odds, SSundee actually achieves victory. He uses pure brute force FPS aiming skills to take down the mighty king using the absolute weakest piece on the board. The king falls to a pawn not because of some brilliant checkmate, but just because of a better trigger finger. So, what does this all mean? Well, it leaves us with this final thought. When you look at the smoke clearing, the crushed jetpacks, and a king defeated by a pawn with a gun, is FPS chess the ultimate fast-paced evolution of strategy? Or is it just the hilarious, chaotic end of it? I'll let you decide. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this provided a fascinating look at what happens when classic board games go entirely off the rails.